Some roads don't lead anywhere. Some roads never let you leave. Daniel Carter has spent years driving through the night, crossing miles of empty highways, watching the world disappear in the rearview mirror. But tonight is different, because the road isn't empty anymore. It started with a woman, standing alone, perfectly still, watching him. Then the radio whispered his name. The clock stopped at 3:33, and no matter how fast he drove, the road never changed. Something is wrong. Something is waiting, and the moment he stops, it gets in.
The road in front of him went on and on. It was a thin, cracked ribbon of asphalt that was being eaten up by the night. The fog from the trees was so thick that the headlights barely cut through it. The trees' twisted branches reached up toward the sky like skeleton fingers. As he listened to the heavy silence around him, the steady hum of the engine gave him comfort. Daniel Carter had driven on many empty roads before, but tonight something felt off. It began as a whisper in his gut, sending a chill up his spine. He changed how he held the wheel and forced himself to look ahead at the road. It was very dark on the sidewalk because of the full moon, and the silver streaks made it look creepy. Then he saw her, a woman by herself on the side of the road. The first thing that caught his attention was how still she was. She didn't seem to be moving at all. She wore a long, dark dress that stuck to her like shadows on fabric. The thing she held in her hands was small and round. A bag, maybe, or something else, something worse. Daniel's first thought was to keep going. Every truck driver had heard stories like this one about figures and other things that shouldn't have been on the road. Some didn't pay attention to them and got where they were going. Some stopped, but no one saw them again. But his interest was a cruel beast that kept getting in the way of his good sense. To get a better look, he took his foot off the gas. The truck slowed down just enough. That's when everything went wrong. The headlights were flickering. There was white noise coming through the speakers from the radio. The engine moaned and choked, but then it roared back to life. The woman moved in that one breath. She had been a long way away. Soon, she would be close. A lot closer. Daniel's heart was beating fast in his throat. She hadn't moved, he thought. She had just moved, like an empty frame on a film reel. He was now close enough to almost see her face. But there was something wrong with the way her chest moved up and down. The sound it made, a wet bubbling sound, made his veins freeze. His reflexes to stay alive screamed. He slammed on the gas pedal. As the truck sped forward, its tires screeched against the road. In the rearview mirror, the woman was gone, eaten up by the darkness. He felt relief fill his chest for a split second. After that, things started to go wrong. The road didn't change. The same cracked road surface, the same twisted tree, the same old, rusty signs with words that are hard to read, the same dimly lit streetlights that buzzed slightly as he walked by. And the moon. It hadn't moved. Daniel's grip on the wheel got tighter. There was a quick look at the dashboard from him. There was a blink from the digital clock. 3:33. He made a face. Didn't he check the time before? It said the same thing, right? 3:33. He told himself it was just a trick of being tired. That could happen after a lot of nights on the road. It made him tired, so he rubbed his eye. After that, he saw her again. The same spot, the same stand, the same dark dress moved through the air like ink in the dark. Daniel saw things now that he hadn't seen before, though. The pale color of her skin, which looked almost clear in the moonlight. The way her hands shook as they held what she had in her hand. What she was holding was no longer a bag or a question. Forehead. A severed head with lips moving as if trying to make words. Still blinking, still living, and completely scared. Daniel took a deep breath. Before he could think about it, his body did something. Gas pedal, full force. The truck sped forward, but the road didn't change. No end. A loop. A nightmare that will never end. The radio began to crackle again. It wasn't static this time. It was sound. They screamed and whispered, mixing their voices to make a mess of jumbled words. Some begged, hurt and desperate. Others laughed, making fun of them and knowing they were right. His phone went off. His hands were shaking as he looked down at the screen. Nothing. Just a note. She gets in if you stop. Now he was taking short, sharp breaths. He knew he was running out of time because his heart was beating fast against his ribs. For how long did he drive? More and more. The fuel gauge got close to empty. He could feel his limbs getting heavier because he was so tired. It hurt to keep his eyes open, and they burned. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. The moment he did, he wasn't by himself. The air inside the cabin changed. A weight being there. His back was being breathed on. Take your time, not deep, wet. He got a tighter grip on the wheel, making his fingers white. He was unable to see. He chose not to look. He had no choice but to keep going, no matter what. The road went on and on, a terrible loop that wouldn't break. Daniel's fingers hurt from holding onto the wheel too tightly, and the dim light from the dashboard made his knuckles look completely white. The weight of the air pressed against his chest like an invisible hand, making his breaths short and rough. He could still hear the breaths behind him. Take your time, wet, not far enough. He clamped his teeth together and forced himself to look straight ahead. He knew the rule, was aware of how these stories finish. You didn't look back. The thing that wasn't meant to be there was never acknowledged by you. The phone shook again. One more word. She knows you're worn out. Daniel tried to swallow, but his throat hurt. His body begged to be put to rest. He felt like he was covered in a lead blanket of tiredness. His eyes were drooping even though he was scared. His vision got fuzzy around the edges, and black spots moved around in his field of vision. He had to pay attention. One more sound. For a second, just close your eyes for her. He took a sharp breath and let it out. He squinted quickly to stay awake as his grip got tighter and his fingers started to shake. The truck's motor hum was the only thing that never changed and kept him connected to the real world. The radio then spoke again. Not Fick, don't talk. His own voice. Daniel. It was a breath, a whisper, a plea. Wake up, Daniel. His heart beat hard against his ribs. He was not sleeping. He was sure he wasn't. But there was something about the voice that made me think it was him. It was his voice. Then there was another voice. A laugh. At first, it was soft and curled around the static, knowing and having fun. The truck shook. He felt the wheels shake in his hand. The laughing got louder and more stretched out, turning into something that wasn't human. Imagine hearing your own voice whispering to you from the radio. Would you trust it? Or would you do whatever it takes to escape? Tell me in the comments, what would be your first instinct in a moment like this? Now, back to Daniel's nightmare. The road was shaking. Daniel saw something else for a split second. Not road salt, not trees. A spot that shouldn't be there. There is a freeway that is made of shadows and goes out into the void. Not a star. There is no moon. Only black, never-ending, and swallowing. And the road went back. Daniel gasped, and the sweat on his body made him feel cold. A blink. That was all it took. His heart beat fast, and his breath was shaking. There was more weight in the cabin. He could hear breathing louder behind him. Better. One more time, his phone buzzed. She's already inside. He felt a chill go up and down his back and up his neck. Then, in the rearview mirror, something moved. Not a mirror image. Being there. In the dark truck cab, just behind his seat, he saw a shape sitting. He didn't change, not able to turn. He knew it, though, sensed her. The air was heavy with the smell of something that had been dead for a long time but wouldn't break down. It was no longer funny. The radio was no longer working. There was only air left. Too close, a whisper hit his ear. Almost there. Daniel saw a swimming scene. The tiredness was too much for him to handle now. It was like a weight pulling him down and toward a conclusion he couldn't avoid. She stood again in front of them on the side of the road, waiting, grateful, and she had something new in her hand. Not much. Round something. A hat for a trucker that was stained with blood. His hat. Daniel felt sick to his stomach. His breathing shook and came out in short, frantic bursts. His hat. That was his hat. He had left it on the passenger seat for hours with no changes made. That being said, she held it in her bloody hands like a prize. A message that doesn't say anything. He had a tight grip on the wheel, and his fingers hurt from the pressure. It was like the pressure alone could keep reality from breaking around him. His mind was racing as he desperately tried to make sense of something that wouldn't make sense. It wasn't real. It's not possible. The blood was real, though. There was real weight in the back seat. He really felt the breath on his neck. Daniel forced a hard swallow as the dizziness made it hard for him to see. He could feel his body rejecting him. Tiredness was slowly poisoning his bone. I don't know how long he had been driving, Time had been erased by the road, which turned it into an endless loop of fear and repeat. It was risky for him to look at the dashboard again. 3:33. Phil. All the time. His heart was beating so fast that it hurt. This had to be broken. He had to get out of there. But how can you get off a road that never ends? There was another voice on the radio. This time it wasn't his own. The words of a woman. Soft, almost nice. You should pull over, Daniel. His body tightened up. The voice kept going, sweet and enticing. You're so tired. Just a little rest. Just a moment. You're safe here. Something moved in the back seat. The weight moved forward and against the wall. It was so close that he could almost feel the coldness of it on his skin and see its shadow moving around the edges of his vision. The phone made a noise. One more word. Just drive and don't listen. Daniel took a deep breath. His hands moved around on the wheel. One more word. It takes you if you stop. He felt his body shake. Now his hands were shaking and his palms were wet with sweat. He stomped on the gas pedal harder, making the truck go fast. He didn't pay attention to the voice whispering on the radio, the weight behind him, or the person waiting calmly by the side of the road. The road, however, stayed the same. The never-ending loop. The same signs that are coming off. The same trees but with twigs that stick out. The same lamps that flicker. Even though he drove very fast and wished the road would break, it wouldn't. Afterwards, a new sound, a knock, soft, thoughtful, from inside the truck. Daniel felt his chest get tight. For a very short time, he lost his hold on the wheel. The knock came again, not from the back seat, not from the front door, from behind his pillow. Take your time. Beat like 1, 2, 3. His head was only a few inches away from something breathing. He felt sick to his stomach. He felt another wave of cold fear come over him. He refused to turn around, not able to. He locked his eyes forward and clenched his jaw. The force of his grip burned his finger. There was no more knocking. Keep quiet. Afterwards, a hand. He felt cold fingers on the back of his neck. Daniel's response was quick and powerful. He jerked the wheel hard, and the truck went all over the empty highway. The tires made a lot of noise. He didn't care that the huge vehicle groaned under the sudden force. He had to shake it, a need to get away. He couldn't make out the person on the side of the road. The trees turned into a dark smudge. The speedometer went up even more. Afterwards, a light, not the headlights, not the moon. Something coming up, something bright, not the same. He had trouble breathing. Was that it? A way out? Something behind him moved once more. It moved and pressed against the seat, he could feel. As the truck sped forward, the light ahead got brighter. There was a warm, golden light that cut through the clouds like the first light of dawn. The phone shook again. One last thing. Do not back up. Go directly into the light. Daniel clenched his teeth. His eyesight was blurry, and he was so tired that his mind hurt, but he wouldn't stop. The whispers behind him became very loud. The breathing got rougher. The weight made his seat hurt. Someone with claws grabbed his shoulder. One last try to get him to back up. He didn't stop, though. He put all the way down on the gas. As the truck sped toward the light, its engine screamed and roared. The pressure behind him went away. There were no more whispers. The clock moved for the first time in what seemed like a very long time. 3:34. The road was broken. The loop broke apart. Daniel Carter woke up. His body jolted like he was coming up from deep water, and his lungs dragged in air like he had been dying. He had a strong grip on the wheel, and he could feel the road beneath the tires really shaking. His mind was cloudy with confusion for a moment. Not only did his heart still beat like a war drum, but something else was changed. There was no more weight in the truck. The heavy weight pushing against his back, the radio whispers, and the suffocating loop of 333 were all gone. Daniel tried hard to pay attention. Things around him had changed. The road wasn't just that long stretch of asphalt that never ended. The old signs were no longer there. No longer are the same rusty lamps flickering in jest. On either side, the trees were still big, but they looked real now. Not bent or gnarled like bones reaching out to grab him. Only trees. There were only dark shapes moving slowly in the wind at night. The headlights showed him a new road, not the same cursed loop that had caught him before. His hands were shaking. He bent his fingers to try to get rid of the tingling that was still there. He was still driving and going forward, but he felt a change in the air. It was like waking up from a bad dream. The fear was still hanging on him like cobwebs, but there was a big difference. The crushing sense of doom and the suffocating fear of being stuck were gone. He had a quick look at the dashboard. 3:42. It's not 3:33. Not frozen. Time began to move again. When he let out his breath, it was shaky, and his shoulders sagged. It was over. It had to end. After that, his stomach turned. If it was over, where was he? He quickly looked at the GPS screen. The signal was weak, and the little arrow that showed his truck spinning around in a crazy way before landing on a road he had never been on before. The name at the top of the screen was made up of random letters that didn't mean anything. There are no road signs, no names of town, nothing that stands out. Even though he wasn't feeling sick, he clenched his hands around the wheel again. There was less gas in the truck than there should have been, but he wasn't sure how long he had been driving. He was already running low on gas the last time he checked. Still, he was moving, and the engine was still humming below him. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw a brief flash of movement. He couldn't get his breath back. There was no one in the seat behind him. Every hair on his body stood on end, and his heart rate went up. He was sure that something had been there before. He knew it, heard it. He felt it breathe on his neck and hear it whisper in his ear. Now, gone. He swallowed hard and turned his attention back to the road. He had driven into a golden glow that looked almost like the sun. Now, the light was neither behind him nor in front of him. He couldn't remember going through it. He only remembered how fast he was going toward it, desperate and pushing his truck to its limits. He ought to have seen something, should have felt something, like a shift or a jolt, but instead, he was there. He took a deep breath in and tried to steady himself. Stay on the road. Now, that was the only thing that made sense. There had to be a way back if the loop was broken. Places, a gas stop, something. As the road went through the thick forest, it turned a little and went on for a long way. There was a light mist that was whirling around the ground like ghostly strand. It was cut through by his headlights, which lit up the road just far enough for him to see where the turns were coming. The mist got denser as he went deeper. It curled up against the glass and whispered across the truck like hands touching metal that he couldn't see. Minutes went by, then longer. The uncomfortable feeling in his gut got worse. Then, far away, a sign showed up. He gasped for air as relief rushed through him. Finally, a sign meant people lived together. A sign told him he was going to, or from somewhere. The sign's letters became clearer as the truck got closer, even though the paint was old and chipped. Thank you for coming to Black Hollow. Daniel made a face. Black Hollow was new to him. He had been a truck driver for a long time and knew all the towns, roads, and small, unknown places that most people never noticed. But what's this name? Not at all familiar. The sign moved a little and made noise in the wind. He saw something small and almost imperceptible under the welcome sign as the truck went by. The holes in the wood were just big enough for the headlights to see what was written there. Do not stop. His throat got tight. A chance event. It had to be. Some old warnings and writing from many years ago. Kids having fun and trying to scare people. That was it. He kept going. The road went down a little and led to what looked like the edges of a town. In the distance, dim lamps flickered, and the buildings were hidden by the fog. On either side of the street, old, empty houses with peeling paint and boarded-up windows sat in silence. Do not park your car in the entrance. There are no door lights on. A ghost town. The discomfort grew stronger inside him. He told himself that he would just drive through, see a sign for the highway, and leave. Don't stop. However, the truck began to smoke. The machine made a noise. Daniel's heart stopped beating. Not at all. Not now. Not here. The truck jerked, and the gas pedal wouldn't work. It sounded like the engine was sick and choked. Afterwards, keep quiet. The truck stopped working. The radio, lights, and controls all went out. That's how tight Daniel's hands were on the wheel. They hurt. He wasn't breathing deeply, and his heart was beating fast against his ribs. The town was there in front of him, still and unaltered by time. A hollow spot, not the right place. Afterwards, from somewhere in the fog, a soft knock. His body stopped moving. It came from outside. One more knock. The window on the driver's side. Take your time. Thoughtful. He had no control. When the third knock came, there was a whisper through the glass. Daniel. His stomach twisted very badly. His throat got dry. That voice was familiar to him. It was his. There were short, unsteady gasps of breath from Daniel. His own voice, speaking from the other side of the glass, had broken every last chain of reason he had. He tightened his grip on the wheel, but the truck was dead and the key in the ignition didn't work. The air in the taxi was thick and heavy, like tar, and it hurt his lung. Outside, the mist whirled and wrapped around the truck like it had feeling. The town in front of him was completely still, as if time had never happened. The houses were quiet, like empty shells watching him. The knock came again. Soft. Hold on. He chose not to look, but his body didn't listen. He turned his head. He could see himself through the foggy glass, but it was hard to make out. Being right outside the truck. The other Daniel wasn't just a mirror of Daniel. He was real. It was real. The same face, the same jacket, the same tired, empty eyes were looking back at him. But something wasn't right. He stood too still and stiffly, the way his lips curled up into a smile that didn't look good on him. Daniel took a deep breath. The thing on the outside moved in. Its eyes, his eyes, shone in the dim light, and behind them, something that couldn't be seen was twisting. After that, it spoke. Don't you feel tired? It was his voice, but it wasn't. Maybe a little too smooth and aware. You've been driving for a long time. Daniel had shaking hand. His heart beat fast. When he tried to move and reach for the door lock, his fingers wouldn't give in. The other him put his head back and laughed. Now you can rest. You no longer need to fight. Daniel clenched his teeth. His basic instincts screamed at him to act right away. Do not pay attention. Do not answer. Do not move. Something outside sighed, as if it were sad. Its palm was flat against the glass as its hand was raised. The cold wave went through him and numbed his skin. After that, it said something that froze Daniel's blood. You stopped already. He was so scared that his chest fell in. Not at all. He hadn't, though, had he? He had only been here for a moment, right? The wrong copy of himself smiled bigger. His teeth, Daniel's own teeth, looked more pointy in the dim light, like they weren't meant to be teeth. The whisper then came again, from behind, in the taxi, from the back seat, where it was dark, soft, goodbye, near his ear. You let me in. Daniel lost it. To make the truck start, he slammed his foot on the gas pedal and turned the key at the same time. He prayed to something, anything, that he still had a chance. Nothing for a short, gasping second. And the engine started up with a roar. The headlights came back on briefly. The taxi behind him had no one in it. The outside thing is gone. Daniel didn't think about it. He turned his head away. Not hesitated. He slammed his foot down and put the truck in gear. The tires made a lot of noise as they hit the ground. The huge truck jerked forward, sending a furious swirl of mist after it. His speed made him not dare look at the buildings or the mirrors as he drove through the empty town. He quickly saw the sign. Thank you for coming to Black Hollow. He sped up the truck. The road then changed. The trees got smaller. The fog went away. There were also lights far away. Real lights. The light from a gas stop. A bright spot of calm in the nightmare. Daniel's chest popped open with happiness. His hands were shaky. He was soaked in sweat all over. Even though his heart was racing, he didn't stop until he got to that spot and was back in the real world. He quickly pulled in and slammed on the brake. The truck stopped shaking. He finally let himself breathe for the first time. The bright lights went off above him. It looked like the station was real. There was a car parked next to one of the pumps. Through the windows, you could see that the teller was behind the counter, reading a magazine. She looked tired. Daniel laughed in a shaky, almost crazy way. He had done it. He held on to the wheel like it was lifeblood for a long time, trying to convince himself that he was really there. It was over. He then slowly looked at the time. 3:56. He felt sick to his stomach. It had only been 20 minutes, right? Taking the wheel felt like it had been days. He felt a bitter chill go through him. His eyes slowly moved to the passenger seat. His hat was just sitting there, right where he had left it. His breath shook. There was no one in the seat behind him. There was no sound on the radio, but for a split second, he saw the highway in the rearview mirror. I could still see the mist moving far away, and saw something standing there in the dark, waiting. Daniel took a deep breath. He turned away from the mirror. He didn't need to check once more. He knew already. There are roads that never let you go all the way. Some people never really leave either. Some roads don't let you leave, but some places were never meant to be found. In the next video, a man crossed the line between reality and the impossible, and what he saw that night was never meant to exist. You need to see this with your own eyes. Click now.